Good morning, everyone. Yesterday we witnessed horrifically and tragically an attempted assassination on President Trump, a political candidate. And this week's Torah portion talks about an attempted assassination against the Jewish people. This week's Torah portion is Balak. Balak is the story of the king of Edom, attempting to destroy the Jewish nation. But he does it in a unique way. He realizes that there is a supernatural strength that the Jewish people contain. And therefore he hires Bilam, a Gentile prophet and sorcerer, to come and curse the Jewish people. But God puts blessings in the mouth of Bilam. And the Torah portion is filled with Bilam's blessings. Most famously, the blessing of Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. The prayer that we say, quoting Bilam each and every morning when we enter the synagogue and begin our daily prayers. But what's even more fascinating is that the Talmud says that the sages considered making this week's Torah portion the fourth section of the Shema. The Shema that we say morning and evening has three sections. The first one is about our love of God. The second one is about the acceptance of His commandments. And the third paragraph is about being a holy nation. And our rabbis wanted this portion to be the fourth section of the daily Shema morning and evening. But ultimately they decided not to include it in the Shema because it would be too lengthy and too burdensome for people to have to say the entire Torah portion morning and evening. So it was because of a technicality that it was left out. But in theme, it belongs in the Shema. That's how critical and essential and pivotal this week's Torah portion is. And the question is, what is it about this week's Torah portion that from all the Torah portions, it was almost selected to be part of the daily recitation of the Shema? You see, Balak was an enemy of the Jewish people. And he wanted to destroy the Jewish people. But he recognized that the way to destroy a people is through words. If you assassinate a people and you hurl curses at them, ultimately it will lead to their destruction. Tragically, as Jews who have experienced anti-Semitism for thousands of years, we know the truth of that perspective. Because all the violence and the atrocities and the hatred and the persecution carried out against the Jewish people from Pharaoh all the way to Hitler began with violent words. And therefore God says, I will turn your enemies' curses into blessings. And that's why the portion of Bilam was almost selected to be part of the Shema, to teach us that in addition to loving God and keeping His commandments and being a holy nation, we must realize that our words are meant to be a source of blessing, not curse. You see, Balak could have hired Bilam to curse. Instead of cursing the Jews, he could have hired him to bless his own nation. Why curse your enemy? Bless your nation. If he's a prophet and a sorcerer, he could bless his people. But you see, it's easier to destroy. It's easier to curse than to be a blessing. It takes hard work to make yourself into a blessing. If our enemies only realized that that energy they use to curse us and destroy us could be used to build themselves, they would not be in the predicament they find themselves in. And therefore, we as a Jewish people have to make sure that our enemies' curses are transformed into blessings. And God protects and God transforms the hatred of our enemies into blessings for the Jewish people. And that's why we say Ma tovu each and every morning. As Americans, we have to denounce violence. Yes, we could have differences of opinion, but they have to be resolved either in the ballots or through civil discourse. We have to have dialogue, we have to have conversation. We can disagree, but we can never, God forbid, use violence. But not just physical violence. We cannot even use character assassination, words that will lead to violence. And that's true on both sides. We have to use our words in a way that will be a blessing for ourselves, but not to curse others. There's a story that happened a few years ago. There's a woman by the name of Ella Adler. She and her husband, Yaakov, unfortunately their son, Michal, was diagnosed with a brain tumor at the age of 11. They struggled for 2 years with medical treatment of every kind. And tragically, shortly after his 13th birthday, his bar mitzvah celebration, their son, Michal, passed away. few weeks after his passing, Ella had to get a new driver's license. So she went to the DMV. She got a number, and there was a long line. It would be a 2-hour wait. The DMV was crowded with people. And as she was waiting, she said to herself, I haven't prayed in a few weeks properly. I've been so consumed with the grief and dealing with my family. So she decided to pray. She took out a little prayer book from her pocketbook. She looked around for a quiet place, and she saw an empty side room at the DMV. So she went in there and began to pray. She prayed by pouring out her heart to God with all her pain and her anguish and her grief. Then she came to the Amidah, and as you know, during the Amidah, you put your feet together, you stand at attention, you don't move. And she began to pray, and the tears started to flow, and her eyes were wet. When all of a sudden a woman, an employee at the DMV, walks into the room and says, "What are you doing here? You're not allowed to be here. No one's allowed to be here." And she was in the middle of the Amidah. She could not interrupt, so she motioned to her, like, 1 minute, I'm just going to finish my prayer. The woman got more irritated, angry, and started yelling, "You need to leave now." And again, she motioned, I'm in the middle of the Amidah, like, give me a second. At that point, the employee came over, yanked her by the hand, and dragged her out the door. At that point, Ella just looked at her. Instead of getting angry, instead of cursing her, instead of yelling at her, she looked at her with tears and said, "Why? Why did you do that?" And she went on to say, "I don't know what religion you're a part of, but I'm Jewish. And I was saying the Amidah, a prayer, that we stand at attention, we're not allowed to interrupt. And that's why I didn't respond to you." And she said, "Tragically, my son, 13 years old, just passed away 2 weeks ago from a brain tumor. And we've been grieving. Our family has been in turmoil. Our children are suffering. And I had a few hours here to wait online. I said, let me speak to God. I haven't spoken properly to God. I haven't prayed in a while. So I found a quiet room, and I was just pouring out my heart to God. Why did you do that?" And then she walked out and sat back down in the DMV room. 2 minutes later, this woman came over to her and said, "I'm so sorry. I'm Jewish too. I'm so ashamed of myself. I didn't realize what you were doing. I'm so sorry for your loss. Please forgive me." And they hugged and they cried together, and of course Ella forgave her. A few weeks later, Ella published a little booklet about faith during crisis, about her personal journey and her acceptance and her faith in God. And she said, "You know what, let me go back to that Jewish woman and give it to her now that I've connected with her." She went back to the DMV, found this woman. The woman was delighted to see her, and she said, "Here, I wanted to give you this booklet I wrote about faith." They hugged and embraced one more time, and the DMV employee said to her, "I want you to know something. After that incident, I was so embarrassed of myself, how I acted. And I was so inspired to see the way you turned to God in prayer and faith at such a tragic time in your life. And I said to myself, I haven't prayed in decades. I haven't been to synagogue in years. I decided to go to synagogue that Shabbat for the first time in many, many years. And I want you to know, ever since then, I've never missed a Shabbat of going to synagogue. The way we influence others, the way we inspire others, the way we motivate others is not through verbal attacks or curses, but only through blessings, through words of kindness and love. Let us remember the lesson of Bilam and Balak each and every day when we say, Matovu, how goodly are our tents and our dwelling places, O Israel. Let America as well be a place that we could say proudly, how goodly is our country, our nation, our people. Have a wonderful day.